what we have got so far. According to Advaita Vedanta, one pure consciousness exists, Chit. Through Maya, it appears as Ishvara and Jiva. Jiva is me. And because of the interplay of Ishvara and Jiva, a world is created. And what is this Jiva, this Purusha? It's a combination, an error, a confusion between Chidabhasa and Chit. Pure consciousness, reflected consciousness. I am not aware of myself at all as pure consciousness, let alone the distinction between that. See, in our state of error, we are not even aware that there is such a thing as pure consciousness. Before coming to Vedanta class, we are not even aware that such a thing exists. And all we are aware of is the world and the body and the fact that I am aware of some kind of sentient being, conscious being in this body-mind. That's the reflected consciousness. This mixture, like the real face, mirror and reflected face, this mixture is called the Purusha. As long as we stress the mirror and the reflected face, you are in samsara. When you negate the mirror and the reflected face and say, this is my real face, you are free of samsara. Just like that, as long as we think we are the reflected consciousness in body and mind, we are in samsara. We are bound to be affected by the world. We are bound to be affected by the body. We are bound to be affected by the mind also. Very difficult to come out of it. But when you negate this confusion, when you cut, there's no link at all. What links me and the mirror? Nothing. I'm just looking at the mirror, that's all. So what is the link between pure consciousness? Okay, put it this way. One sadhu put it very nicely. What is the link between Chid and Chidabhasa? What is the connection between pure consciousness and reflected consciousness? What is the connection between the real you and the person you? The answer is there's no connection at all. And he said, Bevkufi matra, stupidity only. The only connection between you and the mirror is I would be stupid to think that I am that reflected face. You will say, you are stupid. No, you are not that reflected face. You are here. But I see that. Yes, you see it, but you don't see yourself. That's why you think you are that one. So that's what is happening to us. Now, immediately, a question arises. So these questions come to all of us. The question is, suppose there's an opponent. This is how in Vedanta the subject is developed. Purva Paksha and Siddhanta. Siddhanta means you, the non-dualist, and Purva Paksha means the opponent, the one who raises objections. Often they come from different schools of philosophy. So the opponent raises a question. Just a minute. In America you call it raining on your parade. Wait, hold it right there. Who is the one who says, I am Brahman, I am pure consciousness? Is it pure consciousness who says that? Because pure consciousness cannot say that. You just said, speaking, listening, thinking, understanding, all of that is done by the reflected consciousness. But reflected consciousness also cannot say that because reflected consciousness is reflected consciousness. It's not pure consciousness. So who says I am pure consciousness in your system? So here's the question of, what do you mean by I? When I say I am Brahman, what is the meaning of I in Vedanta? And Vidyaranya makes a distinction of I, the three uses of I. I've mentioned this at other times also. The three meanings of I. There's one primary meaning and two implied meaning or secondary meaning. In Sanskrit, mukhyartha, lakshyartha. The primary meaning of I is the meaning used by everybody, the common person, in the level of ignorance, and under the influence of ignorance. When we say I, what do we mean? We mean I, this body mind, that's all we mean. And according to Vedanta, what we mean is this mixture, this confusion of Chit and Chidabhasa. Pure consciousness, reflected consciousness. This mixture is what we mean by I. Precisely. In general, we mean this body and mind. Why do we mean this body and mind by the word term I? Because the I refers to the mixture of Chit and Chidabhasa, basically the reflected consciousness. And the reflected consciousness is reflected in the mind. So the moment you refer to the reflected consciousness, the mind comes along with it. And the mind is deeply connected to the body, so the body also comes along with it. So the moment we say I, we mean this body, mind, this awareness I. Notice, it's exactly, if you precisely want to point out what do you mean by I, you mean that awareness. This person, this awareness we all of us feel right now. What is this awareness? Now we know the terms. This is Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. So according to Vedanta, under conditions of ignorance, masses, most of us, we mean Chit plus Chidabhasa. Why Chit plus Chidabhasa? Because Chit is always there. When you mean the reflected face, the original face, the real face is always there. So this mixture of Chit and Chidabhasa is what we mean by I. The enlightened person means something different by I. So these are important clarifications. When the enlightened person uses the word I, what does the enlightened person refer to? Because words refer to things. When I say clock, it refers to this thing. So when say I, what does the enlightened person refer to? The enlightened person has two meanings for the word I. One is Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness, and the other one is Chit, pure consciousness. So the distinction is very clear when we take that example I gave you about Sri Ramakrishna suffering from cancer. When Sri Ramakrishna says, it hurts and I cannot eat. And he says, I cannot eat. What is he referring to by the term I? Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. And the moment Hari Maharaj tells him that, but I see that you are in bliss. And when Sri Ramakrishna acknowledges, yes, I am in bliss, that I am in bliss, that I, what does it refer to? Pure consciousness, Chit. Let me repeat that. The enlightened person uses I in two senses. In order to deal with us, in order to live in this practical world, in order to play the role he is playing, because for the enlightened person, it's only a role. The enlightened person knows I am not this. So as long as this drama of life continues, the enlightened person continues to play the role and plays it very well. In that role, the enlightened person refers to the I as that role, that Chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness. Yes, here is a body with cancer, and there is pain, and there is suffering, and there is such a struggle, and I say, I am in pain, I am suffering. Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. But the difference between the enlightened person and the rest of us is that the enlightened person can equally honestly say, even more honestly than that, say, I am not in pain. I am in bliss. Because aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That is the second sense in which the enlightened person uses the term I to refer to pure consciousness. Summing up, how do you use I in Vedanta? In three ways. The ignorant one uses I to refer to body and mind because the ignorant one means only reflected consciousness by I, Chit. You see how useful these distinctions are, Chit and Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness, pure consciousness. But the enlightened one, the ignorant one means only the awareness, this reflected consciousness. The enlightened one uses I in two senses. Second meaning of I and third meaning of I. The second meaning is the enlightened one means reflected consciousness when he wants to deal with the rest of us and play the role in life, not seriously. And really, truly, from his heart, if you ask, really, who are you? I am Brahman. Pure consciousness. The I refers to Chit, pure consciousness. I refers to Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. These are the second and third meanings. First meaning for the ignorant one. Second and third meanings for the enlightened one. The enlightened one sees the distinction between reflected consciousness and real and pure consciousness. We do not. That's the difference. The opponent won't give up so easily. The opponent says, you have not answered my question. Who is it that says, I am Brahman? Only one who can say is reflected consciousness. But reflected consciousness is not pure consciousness. How can the reflected consciousness say, I am pure consciousness? And pure consciousness cannot say, I am pure consciousness, because pure consciousness cannot say anything. Pure consciousness is pure consciousness. And this is a big question. Who realizes? Who is doing Vedanta? Who becomes enlightened? So this question goes very deep. It is asked in many forms. I have, throughout the last few years, so many ways. If I am Brahman, then whom am I worshipping? How can a non-dualist worship God? All these questions can be answered by these distinctions. See. So the opponent persists in asking the question, Who is it that asks, how can the reflected consciousness say, I am pure consciousness? It's not true. Isn't it wrong to say such a thing by your own philosophy? And the answer is, there is no harm in this. Very subtle point. This is because the reflected consciousness is none other than the pure consciousness. Wait a minute, the opponent would say, didn't the whole of this exercise was to separate pure consciousness and reflected consciousness? The distinction between reflected consciousness and pure consciousness, this is what you wanted to teach. And now you have the chutzpah, the gall to say that they are not separate? The subtle point is this. Pure consciousness is indeed separate from reflected consciousness. But reflected consciousness is not separate from pure consciousness. What do you mean by that? Very easy. Real face is separate from the reflected face. But reflected face is not separate from real face. How? Real face can exist without the reflection. Take away the mirror. Is the face there or not? I cannot see it, but you can see. It's there. But take away the real face. Is the reflection there? No. The reflection does not exist without the reality. The reflection is nothing, ultimately, nothing but the reality. By the way, just a little aside, this nothing but pure consciousness, reflected consciousness is nothing but pure consciousness. This entire universe is nothing but consciousness. Yesterday in a class, Professor Arindam Chakravarti was saying that this famous Oxford philosopher, Gilbert Ryle, who wrote this book on the concept of mind, he used to say this reductionism, when you say that, consciousness is nothing but the brain. So that's reductionism. It's called a materialistic reductionism. All of what we see here is nothing but matter and energy. Reductionism. So he used to call it, he said he invented a term, he called it nothing buttery. Nothing buttery. So Advaita Vedanta is also a kind of nothing buttery. It says, of course, he was himself guilty of a little bit of nothing buttery because he reduced the distinction between mind and body to only a matter of language. That was fashionable in Oxford and Cambridge at that time, in the 50s and 60s, ordinary language philosophy. So he said it's just a confusion created by language. This was under influence of Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein and others. So nothing but a confusion created by language, nothing buttery. But what Vidyaranya wants to say is, reflected consciousness is nothing but pure consciousness. Therefore, if reflected consciousness were to say, I am pure consciousness, not wrong. It's all right. It's like this. Who is saying that I am pure consciousness? Pure consciousness is saying I am pure consciousness using reflected consciousness. It's like this. When I say I am happy, notice closely, how am I saying it? The tongue is moving, the air is pumping from the lungs, the voice box is operating, and the mouth basically says, I am happy. Is the mouth happy? Is the tongue happy? Are the lungs happy? Is the voice box happy? No. Happiness is in the mind. And the mind is using the vocal apparatus to express its own happiness. And there's nothing wrong if the tongue says, I am happy. It does not mean the tongue is happy. It means the mind is happy. But the mind cannot speak. The mind speaks with the help of this vocal apparatus. Similarly, pure consciousness is alone the one which realizes I am pure consciousness using the reflected consciousness. So the opponent's question was, isn't it wrong for reflected consciousness can at the most say, there is a pure consciousness. See, these questions keep coming. Many people speak like this. My Atman, I have now understood. My Atman is all right. It is pure, Satchidananda. But I have many problems. What are you doing? You are talking like reflected consciousness. You're saying pure consciousness. My pure consciousness is fine, but but I am having problems. Not my pure consciousness. You are the pure consciousness. Own up to that. That itself is enlightenment. The moment you step back from reflected consciousness into pure consciousness, that your real nature is pure consciousness, and see that reflected consciousness is only your reflection, which enables you to operate this body-mind system. And then in this body-mind system, you come to the realization using the intellect, the reflected consciousness, it says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That's perfectly all right, nothing wrong with it. It's like the rope and the snake. Pure consciousness is like the rope, and the reflected consciousness is like the snake. It's an appearance. It's not real in itself. It's nothing buttery. It's nothing but pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is the only reality. Reflected consciousness is false. It's mithya. And the mithya, the false, cannot exist without the real. It is grounded in the real. Immediately the opponent says, but that leads to more problems. Next question is even more subtle. If you understand the question, the answers are interesting. The next question is, you just said that the reflected consciousness is false. The pure consciousness alone is true. Bodhopi mithya chet. Then if the reflected consciousness is false, then its realization, I am Brahman, that also is false. The knowledge you are talking about, all this Vedantic knowledge, that's false knowledge then. Because the one who realizes it, that reflected consciousness who is saying, I am Brahman, that's false. You just admitted reflected consciousness is false. It's an appearance. Then the knowledge of that reflected consciousness is also false. Not only that, the liberation achieved by this knowledge, you said by realizing the difference between reflected consciousness and pure consciousness, Chit and Chidabhasa, you will be free of samsara. This liberation also becomes false then. Do you see the question? And Vidyaranya's answer there is very blunt and humorous. He says, Na iti kovadet. Who denies it? We are not denying it. We are very happy that it is false. According to Vedanta, you, the pure consciousness, you are always free. Your freedom is real. Your bondage was never real. A false bondage is corrected by a false liberation generated by a false knowledge. So what a crazy philosophy. Advaita Vedanta holds this very seriously. If the snake is false, then the disappearance of the snake also will be false. Vidyaranya says, Rajju Sarpa Visarpanam. Visarpanam means the slithering away of the snake. Even the word, it sounds like hissing and slithering away. Rajju Sarpa Visarpanam. He says, if the snake was false, isn't the going away of the snake, the slithering away of the snake, as if, when you get the knowledge, it's a rope, it's not a snake. The snake is gone. So that going away of the snake, was it true or false? False also. The presence of the snake was false. And then when the snake is dismissed by the knowledge, it's a false snake, the dismissal also is false. Ultimately, what is real? Ultimately, what is real is the rope. Similarly, the so-called bondage, I was in bondage. You as pure consciousness were never in bondage. This because of so-called ignorance. So that false ignorance is dismissed by the false knowledge, and that false bondage is cleared up by the false liberation, and you realize you are always liberated. And Vidyaranya says, that is our position. He says, who denies it? When the opponent says that so your knowledge also is false. If the reflected consciousness is false, and then the reflected consciousness is knowledge, I am pure consciousness, then that is also false. Yes, of course. Then what's the point here? This knowledge will work. That's all we need. It is enough to dismiss the ignorance. Ignorance is in the mind, and knowledge must come in the mind to dismiss that ignorance. You, the pure consciousness, you are always free. The ignorance in the mind was, I am this awareness here. But that's reflected consciousness. That ignorance is removed, and then the knowledge comes, I am that pure consciousness. I was always free. So false ignorance, this is from the Mandukya Karika. We had discussed this quite some time back. Na nirodho na cha utpatti, na baddho na cha sadhaka, na mumukshur na vai mukta, ityesha paramarthata. If the opponent asks, then what is the truth according to you non-dualists? The truth is this much. There is no creation, no dissolution of any universe. There is no one in bondage, no one practicing spiritual disciplines. There is no one seeking liberation, indeed no one who is liberated. This is the final truth. What does that mean? You are pure consciousness itself even right now, and that's a wonderful thing. How ridiculous it would be to say that the snake is false, but it really slithered away. It did not really slither away. You just realized it was false, and you realized it was always a rope. Similarly, this entire dream of the universe of samsara is dismissed by this realization, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That I am pure consciousness, I am Chit. And this, he says, atmanam ched vijaniyat ayam asmiti purushaha. This word ayam in that original mantra of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is, it indicates direct realization. Vidyaranya says, and Shankaracharya in fact himself says, the realization should come with as much confidence as you are saying right now, I am this person, this body mind. With that much confidence you should be able to say, I am pure consciousness. With as much confidence you feel right now, I am this little awareness in this mind, that's Chidabhasa. With that much confidence at least, you should feel, I am pure consciousness. What happens is, before learning all these things, we had no doubt I was this body and mind. Now, after learning all this, we are in doubt. We are not so totally sure that we are this body and mind, but we are not very totally sure also that we are pure consciousness. So we are in a state of doubt now. And Shankaracharya says that won't do. For liberation, for freedom from suffering, that much clarity should be there. The verse, a very beautiful verse. Dehatma jnanavad jnanam, dehatma jnana badhate, atmanyeva bhaved yasya, sanechannapi muchyate. Very nice and humorous verse. He says, just as Shankaracharya himself says, and Vidyaranya quotes it, Shankaracharya says that, Dehatma jnanavad jnanam, just as the knowledge we have that I am this body-mind, that kind of knowledge, with that conviction, if it comes, then it will be enough to negate this confusion that I am body-mind. It must come with that much conviction. Then only it will be capable of negating it. The one who gets this kind of a knowledge in pure consciousness, that means the way you're confident, I am this reflected consciousness in this body and mind. With that much confidence, you can say, I am pure consciousness. Chidananda rupa shivoham. Shankaracharya sings, Mano buddhi hankara chittani naham. I am not the mind, not the intellect, not the memory, not the ego. Chidananda rupa shivoham. I am of the nature of pure consciousness. I am the nature of bliss. I am the nature of Shiva. With that much confidence, if you can say, and humorously he says, Sa nechannapi muchyate. Even if this person does not want it, he will get liberation. Why? Because his very nature is liberation. That's why I say, don't be too eager to become enlightened. There are no, what do they call it in the shop? There's no take back, no returns. You say, I didn't want it. Oh my God, I'm liberated now. The game of life is at an end. Sorry, no returns. Once you have got this, he says, Nechannapi muchyate. Even if, is humorous of course, even if he does not want liberation, he'll be liberated. Because you realize that you always were liberated. You are this pure consciousness, always liberated. Liberation comes choicelessly to such a person. But that much conviction must be there, that much clarity must be there. Summing up, this beautiful mantra which we'll take a look at again next week. Atmanam ched vijaniyat ayam asmiti purushaha kimichan kasya kamaya shariram anusangvaret. If one were to realize this, one means the one who till now thought, I am this mixture of Chit and Chidabhasa, using Vedantic terms. Now we have learned the terms. I am this mixture of Chit and Chidabhasa. If we were to realize, oh, I am Chit, pure consciousness, not Chidabhasa, then desiring what and for whose sake would that person continue to suffer? That person will be able to say like Sri Ramakrishna, yes, at the level of the body, there is suffering. but as Chit, as pure consciousness, I am in bliss. Jivan muktasya ya triptihi. The completion, the fullness, the perfect satisfaction, the perfect bliss of the enlightened, of the Jivan Mukta. What is samsari? I am Chidavasa, reflected consciousness. What is Jivan Mukta? I am Chit, pure consciousness. That is the takeaway from today's talk. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. I pray to the Lord to deliver us from all suffering all over the world. May this light of knowledge dawn in us and we can see our real nature as we truly are. Om, peace, peace, peace.